Hello, dear student. Let's continue with our path through flash foresight. Let's continue with the concept of linear change. However, cyclic change is not the whole story. Having a clear grasp of cyclic change is an important element of flash foresight. But it's not the core of the matter. Developing a keen sense of flash foresight depends more on the certainty that comes from understanding another pattern of change, one that is quite different from cyclic change. This second pattern is acyclic and progressive. That is, it does not cycle back on itself, but progresses forward in one direction only. In other words, within this second type of change, what goes up does not necessarily come down. I call this linear change. A simple example of linear change is your age. Your life progresses in one direction. No matter how well you take care of your health, you are not going to start aging backward. Actually, there is a cyclic nature to human aging, too, in that after you go through your teenage years, before long your children will start going through those same phases, and then your grandchildren, and so forth. And there is yet another cyclic overlay to the human journey, in what we begin as helpless babies, then mature and become autonomous adults, and then in our later years progressively lose our strength and faculties and become more dependent again, almost like a second infancy. Still, in the absolute sense, aging itself is linear. Your children will grow up to become adults, but they will not then de-age back to become young again. Or take a larger example, that of social and governmental change. As we have already noted, society's moods ebb and flow in a variety of cycles, including a pendulum swing within each individual society between a more liberal, open culture and a more restrictive, defensive and reactionary one. At the same time, as you look back over a full sweep of global history, you cannot help seeing a larger pattern of unidirectional linear change. Despite the localized ebbs and flows, there has been an overall consistent trend toward more and more freedom for more and more people. There is something going on here that is not cyclic. Despite its many setbacks and temporary defeats, the march of freedom has moved throughout history in one linear direction. Examples of linear change: aging of individual, growth in the Earth's population, increasing data, information and knowledge, increasing worldwide literacy, increasing number of patents and inventions, acceleration of computer processing speed, convergence of features and functions, and globalization. The varieties of cyclic change are endless. Some cycles rise and fall sharply, like the EKG of a heartbeat, while others arc more smoothly, like the gradual flux of the seasons. Some, such as brain waves, cycle in fractions of a second, while others take place over eons, like ice ages. But no matter what their shape or speed, they are all cyclic. Linear change, too, takes place in many forms, from the sudden logarithmic burst of a population explosion to the gradual accumulation of interest on some sort of new album. Yet, they all share in common the trait that they curve in one direction only, and do not cycle back on themselves as cyclic change does. The following diagrams illustrate examples of these two types of change: cyclic and linear change. Examples of linear change. All the examples from our list of cyclic changes, the seasons, tides, stock prices, and so forth, belong to the first set of graphs. But it's the second set of graphs where things get really interesting. Linear change is where the real action is, precisely because it is not a repeating pattern and therefore creates entirely new and unique circumstances and opportunities. Linear change is what makes the future fundamentally new, and grasping this type of change is what allows you to begin making the invisible future become visible. To a significant extent, developing your sense of flash foresight means being able to recognize linear change and its interplay with cyclic change. However, this is not always as easy as it might at first seem. Some changes are nothing but temporary blips on the radar of time and contain no reliable information about the future. Other changes are so substantial and reliable that they offer very clear glimpses into the future. How do you know the difference? Because if you have no reliable way of knowing, you can end up with some pretty strange predictions, as the following example illustrates. On August 16, 1977, one of the greatest recording artists of all time died at the tender age of 42. During his lifetime, Elvis Aaron Presley sold more than 1 billion recordings and achieved a level of star status unique among musicians. But if no one could equal him, many could certainly imitate. By the time the king died, there were a little over 100 professional Elvis impersonators, and after his death, that number quickly skyrocketed. An entire new profession had been born. How prevalent would it become? 5 years after the singer's death, as an exercise in trend analysis, I construct a careful scientific study on the growing number of Elvis impersonators. Examining the statistics from the years 1977 to 1982, the findings projected that by the year 2000, 1 out of every 3 Americans would be a professional Elvis impersonator. Given the cold hard numbers at the time, this may have looked like a reasonable assumption, but obviously it wasn't. Why not? Because while those may have been cold hard numbers, the trend they implied was as soft as the peanut butter and banana sandwiches the king of rock and roll loved so much. Of course, nobody really expected that we would all become Elvis impersonators, but the trend analysis nonetheless made a point. We make and believe faulty projections like that all the time, both in our own lives and on the massive scale of corporate and governmental policy decisions. We base trends on accurate, factual numbers, yet the trends don't turn out to be accurate. This is a great example. In 1999, the United States government told us we were going to have $1 trillion surplus over the following decade. This projection was based on numbers that seemed just as sound as the Elvis numbers and proved to have about the same level of reliability. According to the projections, we should be a nation of financially secure Elvis impersonators. Oh my god. And this was not an error committed by only the federal government. Of the 50 American states, 47 made similar projections of whopping budgetary windfalls. State governments got used to those rapidly increasing property tax revenues and spent that income as if there were no end in sight. They bet the farm on those projections and came close to losing that farm. What happened? They bet on trends that looked solid, but weren't. The Elvis fallacy, it's a recipe for disaster, and it gets us in trouble over and over again. Trouble that could have been avoided if we knew the difference between hard trends and soft trends, which we will going to review, and you will have to research for hard trends and soft trends for your weekly activity. Also, we are approaching our midterm exam. I will be pointing out the dates at our Brightspace. So be ready. Let's continue. Hard trends and soft trends. People typically don't believe forecasts because forecasts are based on trends and people don't trust trends. We think trends are like fads. Here today, but who knows for how long. The word trendy means fashionable, and everyone knows what happens to fashions. They go, and they come. Well, in and out of fashion. Trends, we say, with a shrug. Hey, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. It's a crapshoot. But science means something different by the word trend, and also business. It means a general direction in which something is developing or changing. And one of the principal findings of my 25 years of research is that there are two distinct kinds of trends, which I call soft trends, like the Elvis prediction and the $1 trillion surplus that never existed, and hard trends. A hard trend is a projection based on measurable, tangible, and fully predictable facts, events, or objects. A soft trend is a projection based on statistics that have the appearance of being tangible, fully predictable facts. A hard trend is something that will happen, a future fact. A soft trend is something that might happen, a future maybe. This distinction completely changed how we view the future. Understanding the difference between hard and soft trends allows us to know which part of the future we can be right about. It gives us the insight we need to start with certainty, because it shows us where we are dealing with future facts and where we are dealing with hypothetical outcomes, future maybes. The reason we typically don't trust trends is that we haven't learned how to make the distinction between hard trends and soft trends. The Elvis fallacy is treating a soft trend as if it were a hard trend. And this happens a lot in governmental projections, economics, markets, etc. Once we know the difference, we know where to find certainty, and the future suddenly becomes visible. That $1 trillion surplus the government predicted at the end of the 90s was a soft trend, only we treated it like a hard trend. We were not only expecting it to happen, we were acting on it as if it had already happened. We were spending like crazy. And the same happened before the crash of 2008 and 9. People were spending like crazy in mortgages, credit card, shopping, new cars, etc. When people are spending like crazy, and also governments, you have to take a big look and start to analyze. So much money was coming in renting 99. We were going nuts. We were gazing at the soft trend like a rabbit hypnotized by the snake, the famous Elvis fallacy. You will have to research two or three Elvis fallacies that happened in business during at least the past 10 years. Hard numbers don't necessarily mean a hard trend. My Elvis projection was based on hard numbers and statistics, in the sense that they were accurate, but it was not obviously not a hard trend. Why not? Because it was soft. In other words, the numbers it was based on could easily change in the future. Making a choice to become Elvis impersonators is purely that, a choice, and one that could easily flip the next day. Choosing an increase in Elvis impersonators as a basis for predicting the future is no more secure than saying that because we had a few days of rain lately, it will continue raining forever, or that because the number of hula hoops or beanie babies sold this year was twice that of last year, it will be twice as big again the next year. These were fads, subject to the whims of fashion trends, not hard trends, not trends driven by immutable forces that could be counted on to continue. The distinction between hard and soft trend is not always quite easy or obvious. To many observers, that $1 trillion surplus looked quite believable. That's the problem with soft trends. Sometimes they look ridiculous, like my Elvis impersonator model, and sometimes they had the appearance of being credible, like the surplus of the American government. Still, soft is soft, and unless the trend is based on a direction of change that is clearly fixed, there is nothing certain about that trend. Saying something could happen is very different from saying it will happen, and that difference makes all the difference. That is the same with the old saying that you better don't start celebrating too early or spending too early before you have the money in your hand, even though it seems like it will happen. It may not happen. Things can happen and the money can be easily gone. But you had already spent it at your credit card. And the hard trend is that you have to pay. Just saying. A hard trend can be either cyclic or linear in nature. Both types of change yield hard trends. For example, if the stock market is falling today, we know that in the future it will go back up again. And we know that with certainty. The rise and fall of the stock market is a cyclic change and a hard trend. Exactly when will it turn and start going up again? And how high will it go when it does? We don't know. The exact timing and extent of the market's behavior is a soft trend. Because our behavior and choices can influence it, what we know is that after it falls, it will rise. And after it rises, it will fall. That may sound like a fairly simplistic hard trend, but it has been reliable enough to make Warren Buffett a very rich man. On the other hand, if the rate at which our laptop computers or smartphones can process an audio or video has gotten a lot faster in the last few decades, what can we know about the future? They'll be even faster. The increasing speed and capacity of computer processors is not cyclic, it's linear and a hard trend. Exactly which manufacturers will be introducing the newest breakthroughs models 5 years from now? We don't know. The acceleration of the technology is a hard trend, but who takes advantage of that technological advancement and brings it to the market? That's a soft trend. To get a clearer sense of what a hard trend looks like, let's revisit the American landscape at the close of World War II, when the American suburbs were poised to explode across the nation and GM still ruled the world. As American GIs returned victorious from their overseas tours of duty, millions of families were united. And 9 months later, something happened that was 100% predictable. A lot of babies started appearing. Today, there are about 78 million Americans who were born during the 18-year population boom lasting from 1946 through 1964, and there are similar large groups in Japan, Europe, Latin America, and also other developing nations of the post-World War II era. Demographics is one of the primary generators of tangible, measurable hard trends, and the post-World War II baby boom is one of the clearest and most dramatic examples. This post-war population boom is a physical fact. Those millions of people were born and they're going to stay born. What's more, they're going to consistently and progressively get older, creating a fully predictable set of consequences as they age. Right, the baby boom, you may be saying. That's old news. You already know about the baby boom. Everyone does. And that's what makes it such a great example. Because even though we think we know all about it, we keep missing it. This hard trend has been clearly visible for over half a century. And yet, amazingly, this population boom has continued to catch us by surprise at every stage of the boomers' lives. In 1945, we might have predicted that with all those soldiers came home, something big was going to happen. But we didn't. And when the wave of births started happening in 1946, we didn't have enough hospitals. Okay, so we missed the hospitals, but surely we could learn from our mistakes. We had a good 5 years before all these newborns would be ready for the kindergarten. So we had plenty of time to prepare, right? Wrong. After 5 years of headlines screaming that there weren't enough hospitals to have all those babies, all of a sudden we didn't have enough kindergartens. About 7 years later, what do you know? Suddenly we didn't have enough junior high schools. A few years after that, we discovered that there were not enough high schools. And you'll never guess what happened next. Suddenly we found that we had not built enough college. Who could have possibly seen all this coming? Anyone could if they had developed the habit of looking at hard trends. Recently, my company consulted to a major insurance company as we talked about hard trends and soft trends, about certainty and the fact that demographics was a good hard trend generator. One gentleman interrupted. Yes, yes, we know all about demographics and baby boomers. We understand all that. Great, I replied. Then we don't have to cover all that ground. So let me just ask just a few questions. Roughly, how many salespeople do you have driving your total sales around the globe? They knew this number right off the bat, and it was huge. Okay, I ventured. Let's see. Could you tell me of those salespeople who generate 80% or more of your global sales? How many are within 3 years of retirement? There was an awkward silence. They could not tell me that number. They never thought to ask the question. One executive went onto his laptop to access information. They knew who their top salespeople were, so it wasn't hard to pull the answer from their database. Once we queried the system and gotten back our answer, the awkward silence turned to a shock silent, 60%. In the following 3 years, 3 out of 5 of their top salespeople would be gone, and all that know-how and experience would be gone with them. The executives were thunderstruck. An important piece of information had just become visible. Why hadn't they seen this coming? Because they hadn't looked. They had not developed the habit of starting with what they knew. At about the same time, I happened to be consulting with leaders from the Social Security Administration. As we began our session, the man who brought me in to speak introduced me to their head of training, and we began talking about the situation facing Social Security. At what second past midnight on January 1, 2008, the first baby boomer turned 62, making her eligible for early Social Security benefits. During 2008, about 3.2 million baby boomers turned 62. That's about 365 per hour. Today, the Social Security caseload is about 50 million people. By 2030, it will be 84 million people. Medicare will go from 44 million beneficiaries to 79 million. At that point, we'll have about 2 workers contributing to the system for each retired beneficiary. Back in 1945, that ratio was 42 to 1. As with the insurance company, I asked them if they had looked at the effects of retirement on their own organization. For example, I said, how many of you are retiring within the next few years? It was a fairly large group of senior leaders, and quite a few hands went up. Much to their shock, a major percentage of their key senior people again, the ones with the bulk of experience and know-how, were on their way out of the door. I once heard the CEO of Sony say, if we only knew that we know. He was talking about the data stored in their computers, but their comment applies here too. We all think we know that a lot of baby boomers are about to retire, but do we? 2 months later, we had a vivid demonstration of the trend we were looking at. The man who had brought me into the consult to the agency was gone. A month later, so was the head of training. Both had retired. The exodus of retiring boomers had begun. Or to put it more accurately, they weren't really gone. They were still part of the Social Security system. Only now they were its customers.